So here we have a rusty nail. And no one wants to step on a rusty nail. But we could all agree that it's an accident that could happen to any one of us. So what are the risks? Well, the risks are that you could get a bacterial infection from the bacterium Clostridium tetani. This is commonly known as the tetanus bacterium, and it releases a chemical that leads to muscle spasms. The whole body can become rigid, especially the jaw. You may have heard of lockjaw. And so lockjaw is caused by this bacterium. And so this is a pathogen, a pathogen is any disease-causing agent. Any disease-causing agent. Anything that can get into your body and wreak havoc is considered to be a pathogen. Okay, so let's take a look at some other commonly acquired pathogens. There are viruses, such as this swine flu virus, and viruses are non-living and rely on your body, the host, for their replication. There are bacteria, such as this E. coli, which actually naturally lives inside us, but we can get from food poisoning. Bacteria are single-celled prokaryotes that multiply extremely rapidly. And then there are the fungi, which are heterotrophic eukaryotes, and such as, for example, athlete's foot, which you could acquire from showering in a public place barefoot, and because they like to live between your toes, where it's dark and warm and sometimes moist. And then there are tapeworms. This is a parasite or a eukaryotic multicellular organism that you can acquire from raw or undercooked meat. Other parasites include those that cause malaria or African sleeping sickness. For any of these pathogens to get into your body, they must somehow break through a physical barrier. The skin is your body's primary physical barrier. You also have what are called mucous membranes. Mucous membranes are the coverings of orifices that secrete mucus, and they're shown here in the inside of the mouth, also intestines and respiratory passages. If these areas are broken, then pathogens can enter the body. Fortunately, the body's developed ways of defending itself. There are two main categories of the body's defense. You have what we're talking about in this lecture, which is nonspecific or innate immunity. And the body, with its innate immune mechanisms, can react and attack any type of pathogen, whether it be virus, fungal, bacteria, or parasites. And it's usually the first line of the body's defense after invasion through one of the external barriers. And then you have the specific immunity, which is sometimes called adaptive immunity. And this is the body's defense against a specific pathogen. The body has ways of remembering that pathogen in case that pathogen invades in the future. The body, using its adaptive mechanisms, can respond much more quickly, so the person doesn't even feel the symptoms of that pathogen. Innate immunity is the body's first defense against invading pathogens. And white blood cells are the cells of the body that attack the pathogen, specifically cells that carry out phagocytosis. Phagocytosis is cell eating. And so these cells swallow up the invading pathogens. White blood cells are, like all blood cells, are originally made in the bone marrow. And there are these neutrophils which make up 50 to 70% of all white cells and they can squeeze through capillary walls into tissue spaces where pathogens may be found. There are also macrophages which carry out phagocytosis and also remove worn out cellular debris in the body. Then there are these dendritic cells, which are called dendritic because they have these spines that reminded scientists of the dendrites of neurons. And then you have the eosinophils, which are phagocytizing cells that are important in removing parasites from the body. All of these cells participate in what is called the inflammatory response. And inflammatory, that word, has inflame in it, right? Because inflame is about heat or fire. And the inflammatory response is when many different blood cells and blood arrive to the site of infection and you feel a warming, which is part of the swelling response that you get. And so this is then going to be triggered by, let's say, a nail of some kind, right? You step on a nail and goes into the skin, and that nail could then have on it these bacterial cells that I'm drawing. And that bacteria and the nail causes tissue damage, and tissue damage leads to the release of chemicals which are called histamines. Well, histamines are one type of chemical that is released from cells in tissues that are damaged, and what that can then do is trigger the recruitment of white blood cells from the capillaries. And so here we have capillaries, and capillaries are the smallest blood vessels which are surrounded by a thin layer of epithelial cells, which I'm drawing here. And so blood is moving through, and macrophages and neutrophils can then squeeze through. I'm drawing them in purple. These cells squeeze through the capillary linings because one of the functions of histamines is that it makes the capillary walls more permeable. And so these big cells squeeze through and end up in the tissue area where they then phagocytize phagocytosis, the bacterial cells. The result of all of this is that you get an inflammation, warmth in the area, and some pain as well, which is from chemicals that are released that trigger sensory neurons. But realize that all of this is your body's healing response. If there's been a damage to the blood vessel directly, then platelets, which are cell fragments, can be involved in blood clotting. Which happens after the inflammation and after the increase in blood flow to the site. Other cells that are involved in the body's innate immune response are natural killer cells. And natural killer cells are also large white blood cells. They do not do phagocytosis, but actually they puncture the infected cell membrane. And so if you have a cell of the body that has been infected, then along comes the natural killer or NK cell that releases chemicals that cause the cell to then burst. And and then the cell dies, and the infection does not spread. As part of the innate immune response, there are also peptides and proteins that are involved. Peptide is a small protein of less than 100 amino acids. And for example, interferon is a type of protein that is secreted by virus-infected cells, and it inhibits protein synthesis in neighboring cells. So it inhibits viral protein synthesis. So it actually prevents other cells from being infected by viruses. And then there are the complement proteins. Complement is actually a series of about 30 proteins, and they act in sequence, and they're activated by pathogens, and then they will ultimately trigger the infected cell to burst, which you can see in this picture. So basically they put holes in the cell, and then all this fluid rushes in and the cell bursts. Another nonspecific response of the body to infection is fever. And so the pathogen infects the body, and the body makes chemicals that go to the hypothalamus in the brain, and the hypothalamus is responsible for controlling the body's temperature, or controlling the set point at 98.6. And the hypothalamus then changes the set point, and we get an increase in body temperature. But realize that body temperature above 103 degrees can start to inhibit the body's natural enzymes. Over 105 degrees, the temperature can actually often be fatal. But the purpose of the fever is that it inhibits the pathogen from dividing and multiplying. And it is also thought that it can increase the division of white blood cells that are then going to be attacking the pathogen. And it is also thought to increase phagocytosis. So lots of benefit of the increased temperature, but as long as the temperature does not get to be too hot. Hopefully before you step on a rusty nail, you will get your tetanus shot. A tetanus shot is a vaccination. A vaccination is when you are injected with a vaccine. A vaccine is a weakened or killed virus or bacterium, killed pathogen, and it is injected in you. And the result is that it triggers your adaptive immunity. And you already have all of the cells in place to fight infection. Adaptive immunity is what we're going to talk about in my next lecture. And you may get some Clostridium tetani into your body, but you will not feel any of the symptoms of this bug because you will already have memory cells in place to fight it off. And that ends our lecture on adaptive immunity. And thank you for listening.